September 1st, 1939. As dawn broke over the Polish countryside, the thunderous roar of German aircraft filled the skies above Warsaw. This was not just another military exercise or diplomatic posturing. This was the moment that would plunge the entire world into the most devastating conflict in human history. Within hours, Britain and France would declare war on Nazi Germany, and what began as a European dispute would eventually engulf every continent, claiming the lives of over 70 million people and reshaping the very foundation of our modern world. The seeds of this catastrophic war had been planted 2 decades earlier in the aftermath of the Great War. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, had left Germany economically crippled and politically humiliated. Massive war reparations, territorial losses, and military restrictions created a fertile ground for extremist ideologies to take root. Into this chaos stepped Adolf Hitler, a failed Austrian artist who would transform himself into one of history's most destructive figures. His Nazi party promised to restore German pride and reverse the perceived injustices of Versailles, but their vision extended far beyond mere national revival. Hitler's ideology was built on a foundation of racial superiority and territorial expansion. The concept of Lebensraum, or living space, demanded that Germany expand eastward to provide room for what the Nazis considered the superior Aryan race. This wasn't merely political ambition. It was a blueprint for genocide and enslavement on an unprecedented scale. By the mid-1930s, as Hitler consolidated power and began rearming Germany in violation of international treaties, the warning signs were unmistakable. Yet the democratic nations of Europe, still traumatized by the carnage of the previous war, chose appeasement over confrontation. The invasion of Poland in September 1939 marked the end of this policy of appeasement. Hitler had calculated that Britain and France would once again back down, as they had done during the remilitarization of the Rhineland, the Anschluss with Austria, and the dismemberment of Czechoslovakia. This time, he was catastrophically wrong. Within 48 hours of German forces crossing the Polish border, both Britain and France declared war, though their initial response was largely symbolic. The period that followed became known as the Phony War, as Western Europe experienced an eerie calm while Poland was brutally carved up between Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia. The real war began in earnest in April 1940 with Germany's lightning conquest of Denmark and Norway, followed by the devastating blitzkrieg campaigns that overran Belgium, the Netherlands, and France in a matter of weeks. The speed and coordination of these attacks revolutionized warfare, combining tanks, aircraft, and motorized infantry in a deadly ballet of destruction that rendered traditional defensive strategies obsolete. By June 1940, Nazi Germany controlled most of Western Europe, and Britain stood alone against the fascist tide. The Battle of Britain that followed represented one of history's most crucial turning points. From July to October 1940, the Royal Air Force fought desperately to maintain air superiority over the British Isles, while German bombers pounded London and other major cities night after night. The courage of the few hundred RAF pilots who took to the skies in their Spitfires and Hurricanes literally determined the fate of democracy. Their victory not only saved Britain from invasion, but also preserved the last democratic stronghold in Europe, providing a base from which the eventual liberation of the continent would be launched. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, another aggressive power was pursuing its own imperial ambitions. Japan had already been waging war in China since 1937, committing horrific atrocities such as the rape of Nanking, where hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians were systematically murdered. The Japanese military leadership believed that control of Southeast Asia and the Pacific was essential for Japan's survival as a great power. This conviction would lead them to make one of the most fateful decisions in military history. December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. At 7:55 in the morning, Hawaiian time, Japanese aircraft launched a surprise attack on the United States Naval Base at Pearl Harbor. In less than 2 hours, they had sunk or damaged 18 American warships, destroyed nearly 200 aircraft, and killed over 2,000 servicemen. The attack was tactically brilliant but strategically disastrous for Japan. It brought the United States, with its vast industrial capacity and population, fully into the war against the Axis powers. The entry of America transformed the conflict from a primarily European and Asian war into a truly global struggle. President Franklin Roosevelt had long recognized the threat posed by fascism, but American public opinion had remained largely isolationist. Pearl Harbor shattered this isolationism overnight, uniting the American people behind a war effort that would mobilize every aspect of society. American factories, which had been producing consumer goods, were rapidly converted to produce tanks, aircraft, and ships at a rate that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. However, the immediate aftermath of Pearl Harbor brought nothing but bad news for the Allies. Japanese forces swept across the Pacific with the same lightning speed that had characterized German victories in Europe. Hong Kong, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, and the Philippines all fell in rapid succession. The Bataan Death March, where thousands of American and Filipino prisoners were forced to march 65 miles under brutal conditions, demonstrated the savage nature of Japanese military culture and foreshadowed the horrors that would characterize the Pacific War. In Europe, Hitler made his own fateful decision in June 1941 when he launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. This massive offensive involved over 3 million German troops advancing along a front stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Initially, the attack seemed to follow the same pattern as previous German victories. Millions of Soviet soldiers were captured or killed, and German forces advanced to within sight of Moscow. But Hitler had underestimated both the vastness of Russia and the resilience of its people. The siege of Leningrad lasted 872 days, during which over 1 million civilians died from starvation, disease, and bombardment. The battle for Stalingrad became a symbol of Soviet resistance and German overreach. What began as a strategic objective became a matter of personal prestige for Hitler, who refused to allow tactical withdrawals even when they made military sense. The result was the encirclement and destruction of an entire German army, marking the beginning of Germany's long retreat from Russian soil. As the war progressed, its true horror began to emerge. The Nazi regime's systematic murder of 6 million Jews, along with millions of other victims including Roma, disabled individuals, political prisoners, and others deemed undesirable, represented genocide on an industrial scale. The concentration camps and extermination camps scattered across occupied Europe were factories of death, designed to eliminate entire populations with ruthless efficiency. The liberation of these camps by Allied forces in 1944 and 45 revealed the full extent of Nazi barbarity to a shocked world. The year 1944 marked the beginning of the end for the Axis powers. On June 6th, D-Day, Allied forces launched the largest amphibious invasion in military history, establishing a second front in Western Europe. The beaches of Normandy were transformed into killing fields as American, British, and Canadian forces fought their way ashore under withering German fire. The success of this operation, combined with the continued Soviet advance from the east, meant that Germany was now fighting a war on two fronts that it could not possibly win. In the Pacific, American forces began their island-hopping campaign, systematically capturing strategic positions while bypassing heavily fortified Japanese strongholds. The battles for Iwo Jima and Okinawa demonstrated the fanatical resistance that Allied forces could expect as they approached the Japanese home islands. The casualty rates in these battles were staggering, with American losses alone exceeding 60,000 killed and wounded. The prospect of invading Japan itself seemed to promise casualties in the millions. It was against this backdrop that President Harry Truman, who had assumed office following Roosevelt's death in April 1945, made the decision to use the atomic bomb. The destruction of Hiroshima on August 6th and Nagasaki on August 9th, 1945, demonstrated a new level of destructive power that rendered conventional warfare obsolete. The decision to use these weapons remains one of the most controversial in military history, but it achieved its immediate objective of forcing Japan's surrender without the need for a costly invasion. Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, and the formal surrender ceremony took place aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay on September 2nd. After 6 years of unprecedented destruction, World War II was finally over. The cost had been staggering: over 70 million dead, entire cities reduced to rubble, and economies shattered across the globe. The war's end did not bring peace, but rather the beginning of a new kind of conflict. The alliance between the Western democracies and the Soviet Union, forged in the crucible of war against fascism, quickly dissolved into the Cold War rivalry that would define international relations for the next 4 decades. The division of Europe, the emergence of nuclear weapons, and the creation of competing military alliances all stemmed directly from the war's outcome. Perhaps most significantly, World War II marked the end of European dominance in world affairs. The old colonial empires, weakened by years of warfare, began to crumble as independence movements gained strength across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. The United States and Soviet Union emerged as superpowers, while Britain and France, despite being on the winning side, found their global influence permanently diminished. The war also fundamentally changed how we think about human rights and international law. The Nuremberg trials established the principle that individuals could be held accountable for crimes against humanity, even when acting under orders from their government. The United Nations, founded in the war's aftermath, represented an attempt to create an international system that could prevent such conflicts in the future. For the generation that lived through World War II, it represented the defining experience of their lives. From the young men who stormed the beaches of Normandy to the women who worked in munitions factories, from the resistance fighters who risked everything to oppose occupation to the civilians who endured years of rationing and bombardment, the war touched every aspect of human experience. Their courage, sacrifice, and determination in the face of unprecedented evil saved democracy and freedom for future generations. Today, as the last veterans of that conflict pass away, it becomes even more crucial to remember and understand what happened between 1939 and 1945. The rise of fascism was not inevitable, nor was its defeat guaranteed. It required the combined efforts of millions of ordinary people who chose to stand up against tyranny, often at tremendous personal cost. Their example reminds us that freedom and democracy are not birthrights, but achievements that must be constantly defended and renewed by each generation. The lessons of World War II remain painfully relevant in our contemporary world. The dangers of unchecked authoritarianism, the power of propaganda to manipulate public opinion, the importance of international cooperation, and the devastating consequences of racial and ethnic hatred are as important today as they were 8 decades ago. As we face new challenges to democratic values and international stability, we would do well to remember the price that was paid by those who came before us to secure the freedoms we often take for granted. World War II was more than just a military conflict. It was a struggle for the very soul of human civilization. Its outcome determined whether the future would be shaped by the values of democracy and human dignity or by the forces of tyranny and oppression. The fact that we live in a world where those democratic values, however imperfect, continue to provide hope and opportunity for billions of people is a testament to the courage and sacrifice of those who fought and died in that greatest of all conflicts.